And good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Navigate B2B. I'm your host, Steve Ferreira, and I'm CEO of Ocean Audit, a global ocean freight refund recovery firm. I'm situated here in Hartford, Connecticut, serving clients all around the world. And I love the ocean industry so much, they even gave me a show about it. Can you imagine that? That's crazy. I am so pleased to be here with you guys today. First off, all the love and wishes and great holiday success and seasonal wishes to my great audience out there. We're a new show on FreightWaves, and Navigate B2B is all about bringing you the B2B or expanding the B2B persona in each one of us, whether we're in ocean freight, transportation, logistics, freight broker, investment community, sales, marketing, whatever you have. And all these components all come together. And in my role in ocean freight, I get to meet a lot of really interesting and top-notch thought leaders. Today's show is no different at all. As a matter of fact, my guest today doesn't really do that many TV interviews. He's been working hard behind the scenes the last couple of years to build a very, very attractive, shiny object that is front and center with the investment community, the shipper community, and the carrier community. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce that special guest. Please meet the CEO of the New York Shipping Exchange, also known as NYSHEX. And I'd like you to meet my guest, Gordon Trouncer Downs. Gordon, welcome to Navigate B2B.
Hey, Steve, great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and happy to be on the show.
Wow, we're so pleased to have you. I mean, talk about being in the right place, the right time. I had a guest on a few weeks ago, Jay Mintzmeyer of Value Investors Edge, and Jay is a specialist in analyzing the container charter markets and stocks in that market. I mean, our industry has been on a wild rocket ship, upward, obviously, right? Space, rates. I mean, Jeremy Nixon came out and said, hey, the industry's sold out. So let's start talking about some of the easy stuff and the low-hanging fruit before we start talking about NYSHEX. So we're in this really interesting situation. We've got in the Trans-Pacific, we've got the Shanghai Container Freight Index at pretty much all-time highs. But really, Gordon, the Shanghai Container Freight Index doesn't tell the full story because there are so many additional add-ons to that. So we're now in a spot where shippers and consignees are looking for a solution. So in your professional opinion, give us your top 30,000-foot perspective on what the state of the industry is and what the main problems are.
Yeah, it's a great question, Steve. I think there's a lot of challenges that the industry is running into at the moment, and some of them actually link back to a much deeper root cause. But just to go through the challenges that we see is, first off, you mentioned it already, the freight rates, specifically on the Trans-Pacific, are at all-time highs. The prices that you see on the SCFI don't necessarily reflect the actual price that shippers are paying to get on the vessels these days because there's so many add-ons, as you mentioned, or premium surcharges. So, the freight rates are very high. In fact, it's not just the height that's the problem. It's the fact that they're so volatile. It's very difficult for shippers to predict what the cost of the goods are going to be when they land here in the US. And that, of course, makes all kinds of internal planning more difficult. We also see service levels are at some record lows these days, and it's due to all kinds of different factors. But most importantly, this causes shippers to run into problems with their sort of inventory levels, or it's difficult to plan the lead time for their orders, etc. So lots of challenges in that regard. I think carriers also have their share of challenges in the sense that it's difficult for them to predict how much demand is going to be how much they will need to load each week, because it's difficult to know how much cargo is going to be ready to ship. And this is something we've talked about many times before as an industry, but there's problems with downfalls, i.e. shippers making bookings, but then for whatever reason canceling those bookings at the last minute. And of course, the problem for a carrier is, when you run a container shipping service, your service is perishable. In other words, if you plan to have a box on a vessel and it doesn't show up, the value of the space on the ship is perished. You can't sort of store it like you can store other things. So, many challenges. And for me, the interesting part is the root cause of all these challenges, the root cause of price increases that are unexpected, or bookings that don't get accepted by the carrier or get rolled, or bookings that no show or downfall, all come down to the fundamental premise that the way that we do contracting in our industry, quite frankly, is very outdated. It was set up, post the 1998 Ocean Shipping Reform Act here in the United States, and it hasn't really adapted to the ways in which business is being done. And that old, antiquated process really does cause a lot of challenges for both carriers and shippers.
Well, I think it's amazing how you stage that, and we can talk about it further on the show. But I think that the other factors, of course, around what shippers and carriers experience now is also on the receiving end and the destination end, right? So you've got port issues, maybe on both sides, trucking, volatility. So there's a lot of uncertainty, even just to get on the ship. And so that leads me into like when I look at my scenarios and I think to myself, I remember a couple of years into my career at Sealand, I thought to myself, wow, I know a little bit about ocean freight. Maybe I should start an importing company. And I'll bring in these little dorm refrigerators. I wanted to make these combination microwave and refrigerators for college students. And then I started to think, well, how will I do that? And how will I organize the shipments? And I'll tell you, Gordon, if I had to do it today in the environment that we're in right now, I see three options, maybe four. And let me share with you what those are. So I can contract directly with a carrier. I can contract directly with an NVOCC. I can do a NYSHEX contract, or I can do some kind of a spot rate, fixed rate platform on one of the carriers. Now, I would choose all four. I would have a mix in my company, Steve Ferreira Import Limited, because I think NYSHEX has a very interesting space. So now that we describe the industry problem, let's talk about how NYSHEX can fix it. Can you give us and our audience that may not be so intimately familiar with NYSHEX how you would solve the problem of fitting in pricing and guaranteed space in a transparent way for a shipper and a carrier?
Yeah, no, great question. Happy to talk a little bit about what we do and how we solve this problem. And I think the most important point to highlight is that what NYSHEX essentially is it's a collaboration between the relevant stakeholders in our industry to try and solve these old, somewhat outdated contracting practices. And when I talk about the collaboration, I mean involved in NYSHEX is very actively many different shippers, many NVOCCs, many carriers. We also work very closely with other stakeholders, sort of industry trade groups. We work very closely with the Federal Maritime Commission, etc., all with the sole purpose of making shipping more reliable through more effective contracts. So, that's what we do. And the way that we do it is based on three things. And it's fairly simple when you think about it. The first one is that when a shipper and a carrier want to make a contract, or I should say when a shipper and an NVOCC or a shipper or an NVOCC and a carrier, it doesn't matter. Whenever a contract needs to be made, the terms of that contract have to be clear. And this is one of the major problems with the legacy contracts, is the terms of those contracts are not clear. So the way that we do this is we have a framework which makes it very easy for a carrier and shipper to understand what exactly they're agreeing to do, and in return, what their counterparty is going to do. And of course, with that aligned expectation, it makes it much easier for the carrier and the shipper to fulfill that contract. And that's a tremendous improvement over the legacy way of doing transactions or contracts.
Right.
The second thing that we do is we provide the technology so that it becomes easy for a carrier and a shipper to see where they are performing against the contract, or where perhaps that performance may be off the terms of the contract. A lot of times today with a contract, the carrier and the shipper doesn't know that something's off track or on track until maybe it's the end of the contract and they look back to see whether it was fulfilled or not and realize there was a gap, or it's during a quarterly business review or something to that effect. And by providing sort of near real-time visibility, it makes it much easier for a carrier or a shipper to see that there's something wrong with the contract and then be able to take corrective action to get it back on track. And of course, the benefit of that is that it doesn't strain the relationships when one party is off track and another party sort of is now being underserved as a result of that. And then the final thing that we do is we get very involved in managing the exceptions. So, unfortunately, it happens where a shipper and a carrier make a contract with the best of intentions and something goes wrong. And what a key part of the NYSHEX process is that when something goes wrong, there's a very clear pathway for resolving those exceptions. And we provide a legal framework that's very clear in all kinds of situations. So, for example, when there's a force majeure or if there's a customs stop, for example, there's lots of different things that can cause contracts to not be fulfilled. And that process of resolving these exceptions means that both the carrier and the shipper feel that they've got a good outcome, and they don't feel that one side is strong on the other side based on some market strength or whatever you may have in the circumstance. And it means that those relationships can become more robust and less damaged by sort of squabbling over how to resolve specific instances when it's made nice and clear and independently determined based on the rules of the exchange. So just to repeat, Steve, the three things that NYSHEX does is, number one, we make the contracts really clear from the get-go. Number two, we provide the technology so everyone can see how those contracts are performing in near real time. And number three, we help to resolve those exceptions when they happen amicably so people can keep moving forward with the contract and the relationship. So I hope that sums it up, and let me know if you'd like to dig in on any of those points.
Yeah, I kind of do. I think that's really good. Now, you often talk, and we've talked in the past about these enablers, right? That have meanings to shippers and carriers. I take it that these are some of the enablers that help make the NYSHEX system viable for both carrier and shipper. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of there's a big need, let's put it this way, to change the way that the industry contracts. Like I mentioned already, I think the root cause of so many problems that we see in the industry all comes down to the fact that the legacy contracts aren't very clear, that the technology doesn't really solve those or make it easy to fulfill those contracts. And when things go wrong, people are drawing down on relationships to solve that. So the technology that we've developed and the solution that we have, really does go back to solving those problems that we talked about earlier on.
Gordon, there's so many offshoots of what I want to do to explore this, but I think the audience should know. I mean, it's always in the back of their minds, especially those new to NYSHEX, that, okay, I get the idea of a forward contract, and I get the idea that there's a way to lock in and guarantee space and a rate. But what does it cost me?
So this is a very good question. And the good news is that it doesn't cost you as a shipper or an NVOCC anything. The cost of NYSHEX is borne entirely by the carrier. So the carrier pays us a transaction fee of $5 per TU. And the cost of that, like I say, is on the carrier's shoulder. And of course, the carrier gets a tremendous benefit from using NYSHEX in the sense that if they have more certainty as to what cargo will show up for their specific vessel, of course, they can optimize the ship more. They can plan the network better. So the carrier gets a lot of benefit. But it's also very important to keep in mind that even though the shipper doesn't pay for NYSHEX, the shipper gets enormous value in, for example, having that price certainty. Once you make a contract on NYSHEX, you don't have to worry about whether the price will go up or whether you have to pay some form of surcharge or premium price to get on the ship. Your space on the ship is guaranteed. And in addition, you don't have to worry about these sort of supply chain disruptions that happen when you may have a contract and you can't make a booking because the ships are full. With NYSHEX, your space on the ship is guaranteed. So there's a lot of benefits for the shipper, even though the cost of the service is provided by the carrier. I hope that makes sense, Steve.
It does tremendously. And, one of the things that we tend to focus on a lot is we talk about the Trans-Pacific, and it's the buzzword of the media, and it's the darling of the media, and so on and so forth. But just to be clear, NYSHEX forward contracts for space and guarantee are available in any trade lane. And could we even be talking about Asia to Europe in the future?
Absolutely, that's in the plan, and I think next year we'll be announcing the launch of that trade on NYSHEX. So there definitely are plans to expand into more trade routes. I think just important to keep in mind that when we first started working as NYSHEX to solve these problems back in 2016, when we ran our pilots, we really wanted to perfect the process and the technology here in the United States, and then use those learnings once they were validated to expand into new trade routes. So yes, we're excited to finally be moving beyond just the Trans-Pacific east and westbound trades, and we'll be announcing more early in the new year.
I'm thrilled to hear that. That's really terrific that the expansion is going as planned. And I feel remiss because I really want my audience to know this, and I'll say this because I know Gordon is very proud, and he's going to defer probably the strength of what I'm about to say here. But NYSHEX has had over close to 30 plus million in the community investment, financial investments from outside entities and investments. So I mean, this is the real deal. Gordon has taken these developmental funds and has put together, I think, an incredible opportunistic model for shippers and carriers. And so, Gordon, let me first of all congratulate you on the recent new funding of 13 million in October. How will NYSHEX use these funds to improve the service?
It's a great question, and it's interesting. This is our second sort of institutional round of financing, and for us, it's been really valuable to bring investors into NYSHEX that can help us succeed in our mission, which, like I said already, is to make shipping more reliable through more effective contracts. And for example, we have Goldman Sachs that have brought enormous value into the way that we think about our business. And in the most recent round, we have New Road Capital and some other investors, which we'll actually be announcing quite soon. But those investors have not only given us the capital we need to grow, but also given us a tremendous amount of value in terms of advice and access to thought leadership in their respective domains. So that's very exciting. And specifically to answer the question about how we'll use the capital from this round, I'll actually just explain how we use the capital from the previous round. When we raised our first round with Goldman Sachs in the lead, incidentally, we also had Maersk, CMA, and Hapag-Lloyd invest in that round alongside General Electric. We used that capital to really build the technology so that we could integrate deeply with the carrier systems and do lots of compliance work by making sure that everything we do sort of plugs into the FMC frameworks and, quite frankly, plugs into the FMC systems, etc. And so the focus was really building out the carrier integrations. And of course, having done that gives us the ability to provide this near real-time visibility of performance on the contracts that we talked about. And it makes it very easy for, once a contract is executed or signed on the NYSHEX system, to be able to feed that information directly into the carrier systems, and managing these exceptions are all nicely integrated into the carrier systems. But the first round of financing was really focused on that and building up the carrier base. And I'm pleased to share that post the investment, we now have 6 of the world's top 10 carriers on NYSHEX, and hopefully soon we'll have more than 6. So that was the focus to begin with. With this new chapter and this new round of financing, we're actually starting to build on top of the foundation we built with the carriers, and we're focusing on the shipper side of the market. So we're investing a great deal of our engineering resources and product resources in understanding what it is that shippers need in order to benefit more from two-way committed contracts. And I think that in the coming months, the technology that the shippers will see is going to become far more valuable to them, far more integrated into their existing processes, far more intuitive to use, etc. So anyway, Steve, long way of saying that the latest round of financing is not only to continue the company's growth, as all sort of early stage companies rely on growth capital, but it's going to allow us to focus on giving the shipper side of the industry the support and the technology that is needed to really embrace this way of contracting.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, you've done a yeoman's job, and you answered one of the questions I was going to ask you about the 6 carriers, and you said that there could possibly be more. Do you think in 2021 we will see more carriers in your portfolio? I mean, you have 60% of the world trade now, so are you going for world domination with 7, 8, and 9?
Yeah, well, look, just to be clear, I don't think it's about world domination. It's really about achieving that mission I described. And just to repeat it for the third time, that mission really is to make shipping more reliable through effective contracts. So I think the value that a carrier gets from using NYSHEX is this sort of very compliant, very robust technology, as well as a framework around, for example, the ways in which we determine how performance should be done. And that value is almost like what you would see in a utility. In other words, if you use this framework and this sort of technology that has already been built, you don't have to redesign it from scratch, and you can benefit from sort of this concept of build once and use many. So the value for a carrier is primarily that sort of utility, if you like. But for a shipper, the value is the more carriers that use NYSHEX, the more easy it is for them to embrace this way of technology and embrace this way of doing contracts, which ultimately is going to go back to benefiting the carrier. So really, the more carriers that join, the more attractive this becomes for shippers. The more shippers that join, quite frankly, it becomes more attractive for carriers. And it creates very much sort of this virtuous cycle where both the carrier and the shipper is better off when more and more cargo is moving through these two-way committed contracts.
I love that answer. And now, if I'm a shipper, how far forward can I buy a NYSHEX contract? One of the things that I'm thinking about is, for example, big pharma, right? And we're going to be post-COVID and vaccine, and we're talking about refrigerated containers potentially, and later on in early 2021. I know your platform covers almost every container size, but how far forward can a shipper purchase a forward contract right now?
Great question. And the answer I'm going to give you may surprise you, but I will say that you can buy as far forward as you can agree on with your carrier. So really, there are no limits. The very first version of NYSHEX, where we rolled it out, we were focusing on 3-month forward contracts. But we've evolved the technology and the framework a lot since then. And the way that the system works now is that a carrier or a shipper can use the technology to make a contract that could be as short as 1 week or could be as long as 24 months and beyond. What really matters is that when the carrier and the shipper make the contract using the NYSHEX framework, that they are aligned and their expectations from what they're going to get from the contract are exactly in sync with one another. And then we can provide that clarity of terms and that visibility of performance, and of course resolve the exceptions that may come up. So the long answer to your question was that the short answer is it really depends on whatever the carrier and the shipper would like to agree on.
That's fascinating. And that's actually one part that was maybe a little cobwebbish with myself, in that you're saying that if somebody talks to Maersk or CMA or one of your partners right now, and they could potentially put a forward contract in covering April of 2021, if I hear you correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll share with you that many contracts on NYSHEX today are already moving well into 2021. So there's contracts that are, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and everything in between.
Well, Gordon, I think that you're going to need that every last minute, every last amount of that investment money, because here's what I think. I think that in 2021, just to give you a little backdrop, I think in my intelligence that I use in Ocean Audit, we've seen a lot of, short-term contracts or month-to-month contracting. Now we start to move into 2021 and we're in this kind of, staccato roll. I personally think this benefits a shipper looking to NYSHEX for not only what we call, you call a forward or a short-term contract, but also potentially a block contract, spreading out and mitigating the other selections that a client or shipper might have with an NVOCC or a direct carrier contract. I guess my question is, how do you see contracting heading in 2021? And potentially this year, how might NYSHEX be more of a beneficiary than they have been in the past?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's an interesting time to be a shipper because there's a lot of choice. As you'd mentioned earlier on in our conversation, you got 4 choices. You can make a contract direct with a carrier. You can use an NVOCC. You can use NYSHEX, or sometimes you can use some of these sort of spot various product offerings that the carriers have now more and more online. And so it's exciting. I'd say for NYSHEX, where we fit in on this is that, if a shipper has confidence that they need certain amounts of allocation or equipment, or a combination of the two, of course, sort of locked in to protect their supply chain in specific areas, NYSHEX is a great fit for that. If a shipper is not sure that they may or they may not need the space or the equipment, then honestly, NYSHEX is not a great choice, because NYSHEX is all about two-way committed contracts. Now, in the realm of two-way committed contracts, we've talked about this, that NYSHEX can support a shipper who wants to do a 1 week contract or a 1 month or a 3 month or a 12 month or beyond contract. So there's a lot of flexibility in there. Really the benefit of using NYSHEX is that it is multi-carrier. So as we talked about already, you can make your contract with one of 6 different carriers, and the way in which that contract will work is exactly the same across all of those 6 carriers. So that's really valuable. You don't have to use a different process or a different type of structure for each individual carrier that you work with. There's a nice sort of consistent approach across all the carriers that use NYSHEX. And the other thing which is very important, and for me this is something which cannot be underestimated, and that is the value of NYSHEX is that it is very transparent, is very compliant. In other words, everything that we do is sort of reported back to the Federal Maritime Commission, and we have an oversight committee that's run by the industry members itself. And that ensures that the shippers that use NYSHEX are always given a sort of a neutral outcome or a fair outcome. And to be honest, some of the challenges that we hear from shippers when dealing with carriers in specifically difficult times is that the carrier acts somewhat like a judge, jury, and executioner in their own trial. And that makes shippers feel a little overwhelmed. And I think one of the benefits that we have as NYSHEX is that, like I mentioned, that framework we've built ensures that sort of neutrality and that fairness in the way that everything works together. So,
right.
Again, lots of different choices for shippers in the market these days, which I think is a wonderful thing. And hopefully the explanation I just gave gives you a little bit of guidance as to where NYSHEX might be valuable for a shipper in this sort of choice, the spectrum of choices.
It really does, Gordon. And maybe a quick answer to this next question, a 30-second version. I mean, with today's choices, if you had 10,000 forward contracts that you wanted to make available, right? Now you've got carriers having their own premium guaranteed spot rates. I mean, is it difficult to get more contracts in NYSHEX with the forward rates, or it really has no bearing on how you and your partners would sell or market the service?
Yeah, I'd say it's very easy to make contracts using NYSHEX. I mean, we've done many of them. The use of NYSHEX is pretty broad at this point in time, and we've invested a lot of effort into making sure the technology and the process is smooth. So it is different. It's not the traditional way of contracting. Like I say, the contracts that we have on NYSHEX are very clear, but it's the 30-second answer is, Steve, it's actually very easy to make a contract on NYSHEX. It's just different.
No matter what the environment is. That's great to hear. And I also found out from looking at some of my data that NYSHEX has in the past helped the export agricultural community. Could you touch on that for a few seconds?
Yeah, it's a great point. There's a little bit of history here. When we first launched NYSHEX, a big focus was working with the agriculture sector or the segment to really help them with some of the challenges that they were facing. Many agriculture shippers have struggled for some time to get equipment in certain inland places in the United States, and that of course affects their ability to sell our grain exports to overseas buyers. So when we first launched, we found some great partners in the agriculture sector, and we co-created this product together. And quite honestly, a lot of what we see today in NYSHEX comes from those early innovators in the agriculture sector.
Well, I love that. And, I think that we touched on so many issues that NYSHEX really does benefit shippers, carriers, NVOs, eastbound, westbound. There's not much that a conversation with NYSHEX couldn't do to benefit someone. So, I really want to thank you for all the insight that you've given my audience. How do people communicate with NYSHEX to get more information?
Sure. I mean, the easiest way is just to go to our website and to fill in the form, and there's one of the people on the NYSHEX team will reach out to you and help you get set up with a contract. It's
great.
The beauty of technology nowadays makes it very easy.
Great. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. You've been a terrific guest, Gordon. You've been talking to Gordon Tronsett-Downs, CEO of NYSHEX, the New York Shipping Exchange. I'm Steve Ferreira, CEO of Ocean Audit. And I want to say thank you so much to my wonderful audience. Gordon, will you come back?
Definitely. Whenever you want me.